Have you ever looked at your bank account in your early 30s and thought, wait, I'm earning more than I ever have. So why doesn't it feel like I'm moving forward? You worked for this. You survived your 20s. You got the degree or the experience. You climbed. You hustled. You figured things out. And yet, something feels stalled. You're not broke, but you're not building. You're not struggling the way you used to, but you're not progressing the way you thought you would either. And the scariest part? Nothing dramatic happened. There was no financial disaster, no catastrophic mistake. Just a quiet plateau. If that feels familiar, I want you to stay with me. Because this isn't about laziness. It's not about failure. And it's definitely not about you being bad with money. There's something deeper happening here. And most people don't even realize it. Here's what we're told growing up. Your 20s are chaotic. Your 30s are when things stabilize. Your 40s are when you thrive. It sounds linear, predictable, almost guaranteed. But in reality, a lot of people experience the opposite. In your 20s, growth feels fast. Every raise matters. Every new skill moves you forward. You're used to leveling up quickly. Then your 30s arrive, and growth slows down. Not because you're incapable, but because the game changed, and no one told you. In your 20s, progress feels exciting because you're starting from almost nothing. When you go from earning $35,000 to $55,000, that's a huge leap. When you move out of a cramped apartment into something slightly nicer, it feels like victory. But in your 30s, you're no longer starting from zero. You're maintaining. You have rent or a mortgage, insurance, maybe a partner, maybe kids, maybe aging parents. The stakes are higher, and so is the pressure. And here's the psychological shift most people miss. In your 20s, your goal is growth. In your 30s, your goal quietly becomes stability. That sounds mature, responsible, but stability can quietly turn into stagnation. There's a concept in psychology called hedonic adaptation. It simply means we get used to things fast. The salary that once felt life-changing becomes normal. The apartment that felt luxurious becomes average. The car that felt like a symbol of progress becomes just transportation. In your 20s, your lifestyle rises slowly because your income is lower. In your 30s, your income rises, but so does your baseline. You upgrade your home, you upgrade your groceries, you upgrade your vacations, you upgrade your expectations. And because the upgrades happen gradually, you don't feel like you're overspending. You just feel adjusted. This is where growth quietly stalls. Not because you're reckless, but because your expenses expand to match your identity. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're just trying to live at the level you worked hard to reach. And that's human. But here's the catch. If your lifestyle grows at the same pace as your income, your net worth doesn't accelerate. It just floats. There's another shift that happens in your 30s, and it's more subtle. In your 20s, you're uncomfortable. You're hungry. You're proving yourself. You'll switch jobs for a raise. You'll move cities. You'll take calculated risks. Discomfort feels temporary, but in your 30s, comfort becomes valuable. You don't want to start over. You don't want instability. You don't want to risk the life you've built. And so you stay. You stay in the job that's fine. You stay in the salary range that's decent. You stay in the routine that's predictable. There's nothing wrong with that. But growth requires some level of discomfort. And when your priority shifts from growth to protecting comfort, progress slows. This isn't about telling you to quit your job or start a business tomorrow. It's about noticing the internal shift. The voice that says, this is good enough. Sometimes that voice is wise. Sometimes it's fear wearing the mask of maturity. Let's talk about time anxiety. In your 20s, you feel like you have endless time. In your 30s, you feel it differently. You start thinking about retirement, about long term security, about whether you're behind. And that pressure can backfire. Instead of making steady, boring investments, some people freeze. They delay opening that retirement account because it feels overwhelming. They avoid looking at their finances because they're afraid of what they'll see. Or they swing the other way, chasing risky investments hoping to catch up. Both reactions come from the same place: fear of being late. But financial growth in your 30s isn't about speed, it's about consistency. And consistency is psychologically harder than hustle. Hustle gives you adrenaline. Consistency gives you spreadsheets. Hustle feels dramatic. Consistency feels invisible. But here's something simple and powerful. If you invest steadily over 10 or 15 years, compound growth starts doing the heavy lifting. Not overnight, not in a viral moment. Quietly. A retirement account growing at an average long-term market rate doesn't look impressive in year 1. But in year 10, it starts to curve upward. In year 20, it feels almost unfair. The problem is, in your 30s, you're still in the flat part of the curve. And humans aren't patient with flat curves. We want visible results, so we assume nothing is happening. But something is happening. It's just slow. There's also something cultural happening. In your 20s, comparison is loud but forgivable. Everyone is figuring it out. In your 30s, comparison becomes sharper. Some of your peers bought homes early. Some started companies. Some seem to have it all together. Social media amplifies this. You don't see their debt. You don't see their stress. You see milestones. And when you measure your behind the scenes against someone else's highlight reel, it distorts your sense of progress. You might actually be building wealth slowly and responsibly, but it doesn't feel impressive. And when progress doesn't feel impressive, motivation drops. This is one of the most underestimated reasons people stall financially in their 30s. They're not failing, they're discouraged. And discouragement makes you passive. You stop negotiating your salary. You stop reviewing your expenses. You stop increasing contributions. Not because you don't care, but because you feel tired. Now let's talk about identity. In your 20s, you're building a future version of yourself. In your 30s, you start defending the current version. You think, this is who I am now. I live in this kind of place. I shop at these stores, I take these trips, and reducing anything feels like regression. But growth sometimes requires temporary regression, not dramatic sacrifice, just intentional friction. Maybe it's keeping your current car for 5 more years instead of upgrading. Maybe it's increasing your retirement contribution by 2% and feeling the pinch for a few months. Maybe it's learning a new skill even though you're already comfortable. Small discomforts now create flexibility later. And flexibility is freedom. Financial growth in your 30s isn't about impressing anyone. It's about widening your options. Because by your 40s and 50s, what you'll crave most isn't status, it's autonomy. The ability to say no, the ability to step back, the ability to choose. And those choices are built quietly in your 30s. Here's the turning point most people need. Stop measuring growth by lifestyle. Start measuring growth by resilience. Ask yourself something different. If I lost my income tomorrow, how long could I sustain my life? If I wanted to change careers, would I have breathing room? If an opportunity appeared, would I be able to say yes? That's growth. An emergency fund isn't flashy, but it's psychological relief. Investments aren't exciting daily, but they're future flexibility. Paying down debt isn't glamorous, but it lowers background stress. The real shift in your 30s is this: from earning to owning. owning your time, owning your risk, owning your margin. And margin is everything. Margin is the space between what you earn and what you spend. It's the gap that allows compound growth to work. Without margin, even a high salary feels tight. With margin, even a moderate salary can build wealth. So, how do you restart growth if you feel stalled? Not by making extreme changes, not by shaming yourself. Start small. Look at your fixed expenses with curiosity, not judgment. Are they aligned with what you actually value now or with a version of you from 5 years ago? Increase your investment slightly, even 1%. Automate it so you don't rely on willpower. Revisit your earning power, not with desperation, but with intention. Are you still learning, still stretching, still building leverage? Sometimes growth stalls because we stop upgrading ourselves. Not dramatically, just quietly. And finally, redefine success. If you're paying your bills on time, building some savings, avoiding destructive debt, and thinking long term, you're not failing, you're building. It just doesn't feel cinematic, but real wealth rarely is. I think the biggest lie about your 30s is that you're supposed to have it all figured out. You're not. You're balancing. Balancing ambition with stability, freedom with responsibility, growth with gratitude. And that tension can make you feel stuck. But feeling stuck isn't the same as being stuck. Sometimes you're just in the middle of a compounding phase that hasn't revealed itself yet. If you zoom out far enough, financial growth looks less like a straight line and more like a staircase. Flat, flat, flat. Then a step up. Those flat years aren't wasted. They're foundational. So if you're in your 30s and you feel like progress slowed down, maybe nothing's wrong. Maybe you just move from visible growth to structural growth. And structural growth is quieter. It's choosing long-term over immediate. It's choosing margin over maxed out. It's choosing peace over performance. And that kind of growth doesn't scream. It stabilizes. You don't need to panic. You don't need to catch up overnight. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to keep going. Small adjustments, consistent contributions, intentional decisions. Because 10 years from now, you won't remember the car you didn't upgrade, but you will feel the relief of options. And that's the real win. If this gave you even a little clarity, stay. Not out of obligation, but because this is the kind of space we're building here. A place where we talk about money without shame, where we think long-term without panic, where we build quietly and consistently. If that sounds like something you need more of, subscribe and come back for the next conversation. We're not chasing hype here. We're building stability.